Greetings and welcome once again to On the Brink Radio. This is Jeff Phillips Wefferson coming at you from Darwin, Northern Territory. This is broadcast number 338 of On the Brink, of which probably 25 or 30% of all of my shows since December of 2012 have concerned the whales and dolphins and the health of Mother Ocean and sea life and the threats to their well-being. And this show is a continuation of my last two shows, number 336, which was about the humpback whale up the Alligator River in Kakadu and the onset of the massive stranding of pilot whales, the largest cetacean stranding in the modern history of Australia, that was going on last week in Tasmania. And then my last week's show, which is looking at the extraordinary and anomalous synchronicity of these two very profound but very different events involving whales happening at the same time in Australia, in the two places where I just came from and where I am now, and right on the equinox, and trying to make sense out of all this. And my last show and my blog post that I just finished yesterday, which is what's making this show so late to be recorded this week, I really sort of started off from ground zero on behalf of my friends in Tasmania and people that are really sort of coming into all this stuff for the first time, about what actually a stranding is and why we think it happens and who the whales and dolphins are and what the real driving factors behind a lot of the war that we're waging on them are. And a big part of my work is sort of penetrating behind the scenes and dispelling a lot of the illusions and stuff. But of course, people are going to believe whatever they want to believe. And as I keep telling people, truth is really just a 5-letter word in English, but truth as a concept has never been popular. It's not popular in religion. It's not popular in politics. It's not popular in science. It's like convenient beliefs are basically what the world revolves around. And truth is really just this abstract concept, kind of like infinity or eternity or forever. Truth. I mean, what's true to somebody might be a lie to somebody else, or what's true to somebody today might turn out to be wrong or fiction tomorrow. And it's all just this kind of very indeterminate and malleable thing. And then intimately related with the concept of truth is the burden of proof. Like, we're going like, oh, well, can we prove anything that might have caused these pilot whales to strand? And I go, well, look, you can never isolate out one specific cause. That happens only in the domain of the experts whose job it is to come up with believable sounding reasons that are never going to be related to what the actual or probable driving factors might have been. And I've talked about that last week, and I'll probably talk about it a little bit more this time. But anyway, what we're trying to do, this show is actually called Australian Whale Anomalies, Seizing the Synchronicity. You know, like we've got Carpe Diem Seize the Day. This is trying to make an attempt to seize the moment of the fact that Tasmania and Australia has really been in the global limelight for the past week or two. And I feel that it's already water under the bridge. It's already being put on the back burner. People are forgetting. People that turn on their radio as soon as they wake up every morning, and their television as soon as they come home from work, and they've got to constantly get the barrage of the spectacle of the day, the spectacle du jour being served up on the plate of the television screen, and so the media is not very good at maintaining a. They've got to have something new every day, every few hours, even though it's really not. It's the same categories, the same bins are just filled with a slightly different variation of the stuff every day. Like you've got your main categories. Like the biggest new category in the past few months has been the coronavirus thing. So you're going to hear any news of the day, any hour of the day, whether it's radio or TV, you're going to hear something about that. And then that sort of filled the gap of what had been the ubiquitous climate change been. And you might have a few, before that it was the Islamic terrorists. And so you've still got bits and pieces of all that being strewn about. But trying to make sense, try to do something constructive with this whale synchronicity here. I've been talking with a lot of people and trying to clarify what the leading edge of our awareness is, and to catalyze increasing awareness on the part of humans, especially in landlocked Tasmania, but in Australia as a whole, where people, even though most of the vast majority of people in Australia live very close to the ocean, and even though you can get 1,500 kilometers from the ocean in Australia, it's not likely that you'll ever find yourself that far away. You're probably going to be always relatively close to the ocean. And in Tasmania, just like in New Zealand, you can't get more than about 110, 120 kilometers from the ocean. So it's their oceanic environments. Australia has more kilometers of coastline and more square kilometers of ocean than any other country. I think France has a larger EEZ, or exclusive economic zone, but that's divided up across many of its different island territories and stuff like that. So it's one contiguous landmass. Australia is unique, and not only does it have that, it's also got the oldest indigenous people with a continuity of culture going back maybe 100 or 200,000 years, who have been intimately connected with the whales and dolphins from day one. Even whale dreaming people who I've connected with on the East Coast a few years ago verified that in their ancient belief, the whales and dolphins actually taught our ancestors how to become people. Now, this is a bit far-fetched for a lot of people, but hey, is that any more far-fetched than people who think that these pilot whales committed suicide? They sacrificed themselves to help us. I really just don't, I have a problem with that. It's a bit arrogant to even consider me. Why? Who are we? Who are humans that other species of life should kill themselves to help us when we're already waging war on them? I mean, what? It's like, it's not. This isn't even just sort of passive dementia. It's kind of like active, malign dementia too. It's the dark side of megalomania. You know, people assuming that our species is we're so fucked up that we need other species to kill themselves, so that because they think that they're helping us. I mean, I've had people say that to me in the past few days. Anyway, when we actually start to look at the human presence in the ocean, it's kind of like a science fiction horror movie. And I know this because I've been delving into this for a long time and dispassionately examining and analyzing every possible thing that I can learn about our presence in the ocean and what kind of dangers that's creating. And it's a very long list. And so the part of my work as an investigative scientific researcher is, for example, looking at the environmental impacts of environmental organizations. Like, for example, Sea Shepherds taking their whole flotilla of destroyer-class vessels into whale sanctuaries like in the Great Australian Bight or the Great Southern Ocean, and pretending that they're helping the whales by doing that. And this kind of thing. But this is all part of the big picture, but not part of this thing right now with the pilot whales in Tasmania. You know, the mainstream reason that the Department of Primary Industries, Parks, Water and Environment is going to give, or this is what they told me, they're going to claim that a freshwater lens formed, which is like kind of like a bubble of water, of fresh water that forms over the top of seawater, and that this formed at the mouth of the river and somehow caused or enabled all these pilot whales to become disoriented and then swim directly into this for 10 kilometers and go that far up into the harbor, directly into conditions that were inimical to their navigation. It makes absolutely no sense at all. It's a new one to me. At least they didn't claim that it was a mystery illness or morbillivirus or, but like I've said in my blog post I just wrote, there is no one single cause. And even thinking in terms of cause and effect, it doesn't really make that much sense. What we have to look at is the overall situation of complexity. I've created several. There's a bit of tongue-in-cheekness whenever I make up all these concepts. I call them, for example, my marine biology tools for examining all this stuff. I call them macro assessment platforms, or MAPS. And I give them names like Gemea, Mamia, Homo Mimic. And they're kind of based on how the military creates all this jargon and abbreviations and acronyms and stuff like that. And so, but mine make perfect sense. And they are useful tools. And like one of the words I was just reading, they like to use the word, they used to see robust. They like to use that one all the time, but now it's become leveraged. They want to leverage the command and control options and with the enhanced situational awareness and all this stuff. So this is military. That's really what we're up against here. And so one of the things, one of the sort of immediate, more kind of superficial things that people in Australia might do now, if they really care about the whales and dolphins, is go like, look, if Australia's investing $100 billion in 15 new nuclear submarines made by France, which that's actually something that's happening. I mean, the figure may be slightly off, and originally they were going to be battery-powered diesel electric, but now I think they're going to be nuclear. If it's made by France, it's probably going to be nuclear. 15 new nuclear submarines for Australia at a cost of $100 billion or something like that. So, not that money really matters. To governments and the military it does, and to most people, but ultimately it's not a reality in itself. It motivates people to do stuff. But what if the same government that handles all that money was able to dedicate, say, $1 million or a couple of $1 million for the creation of a whale and dolphin rescue infrastructure around Australia, maybe a few places, like maybe a couple on the west coast, one in Queensland, one in New South Wales, one in Victoria, one in Tasmania. Build little centers that could be staffed by maybe one person that was a full-time employee, and then volunteers. And each one of these could serve simultaneously as a local information nexus for whale and dolphin stranding and ocean reality awareness and education. They could have workshops. They could train people in whale and dolphin rescue. They could have a computer terminal tied in with information centers around the world. They could have an art gallery. Could have a little cinema where it shows films and educational docos about the ocean and the whales and dolphins. They could create a network of these around the country in honor of keeping the whales and dolphins and ocean life on the public radar. And this would be for 1,000th. This would be for a fraction of the cost of one submarine. And Australia could also take the lead in creating a global whale and dolphin stranding database Now, this is not something, this is more virtual. The biggest part of this is not a physical facility or even computers, but it's about the mentality behind it. It's about the willingness to tie in with all kinds of networks of information that exist. And some of them are, what we really need access to is the classified networks that show us where all the military vessels and especially submarines are. And this information does exist. And if we were able to pull together an information database that was publicly available information so that it couldn't be hijacked and used for any kind of commercial purposes or anything like that, it would be of great value in terms of understanding what's happening globally with whales and dolphins. But the main obstacle to this is going to be that such a stranding database is going to be providing evidence of wherever there is some kind of like hazardous operations, seismic testing, military operations, and secret weapons testing, and this different kind of stuff, because the whale and dolphin strandings are often the primary indicator of something like that just took place. We see the whale and dolphin stranding after this happens, and it can be over a large area. This is one of the things with the three bits of evidence I shared about that shows the possibility of anthropogenic influence in the pilot whale stranding in Tasmania. The first one is the rocket launch that took place in South Australia. The second one was the naval war games happening in the East Indian Ocean. And the third one was the seismic testing going on all through there in September and October in the Otway Basin there off of King Island. All of these are, it may not be right there where the whales were, but, when you're talking about how far sound travels in the ocean and how powerfully, how a rocket could go off course, it's up in the sky, how sensitive the whales and dolphins are, not even in sensory perception, but in stuff we don't even know about, and where they might have been, their range of travel, and say, like, for example, the military naval war games, where those boats were in preceding days and days afterward, and what they were doing. They could have been letting off all kinds of explosives and depth charges and missiles and all the high-level electromagnetic, network-centric situation awareness, command and control information exchange that's constant. And see, what we don't understand is that all this stuff is not just happening here and there. This is a global sort of network of stuff that's going on all the time. And this is where a big part of what I've been trying to do is to create sort of real-time, three-dimensional models of the world's ocean, which is filled with whales and dolphins and fish and turtles and seals and sea life and everybody. And if you look at the total summation of all the military-industrial influences that we're putting out all the time, whether it's the amount of thousands of different toxic chemicals that are in the ocean everywhere, thousands of different synthetic radionuclides that are everywhere, all the different kinds of sonar that are being broadcast into the ocean everywhere by almost everything except for like small little boats has some kind of sonar. And there's active and passive and different power levels and different frequency ranges. But one of the things that ultrasound does is it creates heat. This is something that's never talked about. As well as microwave transmissions in the air also create heat. So the whole atmosphere is saturated with electromagnetic transmissions, and a lot of this is we've been influencing the magnetic field of the Earth for a really long time, and that was what was really interesting. I closed my blog post talking about Arthur Furstenberg, who's the guy behind Cell Phone Task Force and the 5G awareness campaign. he's talking about how around the time of World War I, around 1918, is when global radio broadcasts began to be used in earnest by U.S. forces in World War I. And around that same time was the outbreak of the extremely deadly Spanish flu. And he reckons that the flu virus was mutated by this sudden radical change in the Earth's magnetic field. But this is not science fiction. It's very interesting because in the mid-1980s, I got a communication from an astrophysicist from South Africa who had been in touch. He was interested in the fact that I had worked with John Lilly's Dolphin Communication Group in California. This guy's name is Garrett Verschuur, Verschur. His specialty was interstellar magnetic fields. But he sent me an article that he wrote that was published in Nature magazine showing a correlation between peaks in the sunspot cycle and outbreaks of previously unseen strains of influenza. So it's very interesting to think about that, and to think about if sunspot activity, which affects the Earth's magnetic field and our electrical bioelectric circuits and stuff like that, if sunspots can affect that, then all the electromagnetic stuff that we've been doing since really World War II would be having an equally, if not greater, effect in terms of not only on the navigational systems of life forms like whales and dolphins and birds and turtles, but on our own brainwave patterns and stuff. And we know this because people like Gordon MacDonald have talked about how changes in the Earth's vibratory resonance capacitor can influence and entrain with human brainwave activity. So this is all known to the military. And so it's like we've been doing this all to ourselves since the advent of these technologies. We've been doing it inadvertently, but then gradually coming to understand all along what it is doing. And then, as the tendency has always been, any sort of new technology, if it wasn't designed as a weapons system to begin with, it becomes weaponized. And so this is one of the big central research areas of the whole military, is understanding this kind of thing. Well, the whales and dolphins are kind of the canaries in the coal mine. So this is one of the fields of influence that are there all the time. But we can't prove anything. We can never prove that any certain event or activity caused whales and dolphins to strand. I mean, maybe if a necropsy was done that showed that their inner ear was exploded, then that might be acceptable as evidence to some people that they had just been exposed to extreme levels of high-intensity sonar or blasts of sound or something like that. But barring something like that, it's hard to prove anything. And then especially if these necropsies don't show any organic or physiological abnormalities, which it's likely that that'll be the case, then we have to say that everything that happened was purely, mainstream science would say behavioral, I'll say psychological. Now, they're probably going to likely find, if they look in the right place, and I'm hoping that I'll be talking with the biopsy researchers in Hobart on Monday, and I'm going to recommend that they send some of the tissue samples to Dr. John Wise at the Wise Laboratory in Kentucky. He works with Ocean Alliance, who is to me the top oceanographic research institution on the whole planet. And he did the analyses for their 5-year survey of global ocean toxicity back in 2005 to 2010. And I just got an email from him today saying that he would be glad to look at some of those samples, but that you'll be able to determine what kind of chemical toxicity they have, what kind of burden they're carrying around, which is probably quite unbelievable. But so this, you won't be able to say that the chemical toxicity caused them to strand. But what you can say is that the chronic presence of all this stuff in the ocean, and therefore in the body of all the fish and all the whales and dolphins and all the octopus and everybody, and us here on the land too, the increasingly high levels of all these poisonous chemicals are capable of reaching a certain threshold where it then begins to debilitate our ability to function or degrade our health and our function. And so it could be that all the whales and dolphins, who are all equally exposed to all this stuff, and because the whales, the toothed whales, like the pilot whales and the sperm whales and the dolphins and the orcas, they eat fish, which is higher up on the food chain. So they're going to be eating food that has a higher concentration of these poisons, whereas the baleen whales that eat krill, the krill are lower on the food chain, and so maybe the larger whales like the humpbacks, the blue, the fin, and the gray, and the right, maybe they're slightly less susceptible to the effects of poison. So yeah, I'm communicating with all these people in Tasmania, including media people, and trying to be of service in any way that I can, because I do have a really big picture on this whole thing. And because I've never got paid to do this, I would never accept money to do anything on behalf of the whales and dolphins. And it's like I'm able to speak the truth and to understand I don't have any blind spots or any agendas or anything like that. But the truth has never been popular. And especially the truth I'm about to tell right now, that ultimately we can understand all these threats that we're creating, the impending threat of deep seabed mining, all the ultra high-tech weapons, the drones and unmanned autonomous vehicles, all the AI and the robotics being unleashed in the ocean, the whole ocean of things, the Internet of Things, the militarized 5G satellite network, and all the rocket launches that are putting them up now, and all the different kind of like underwater electrification scenarios that I've talked about with Stuart Simonson, all the systemic pathogenic influences, all the effects from geophysical warfare technologies like HARP and small HARPs mounted on boats, like I talked with Peter Eyre about, the Australian-British investigative journalist, and the unknown and unknowable synergisms between all this stuff, and quantifying the amount of sonar energy, the amount of synthetic radionuclides, the amount of chemicals of how many kinds there are, the number of geophysical vessels or trawlers or shipping boats that are on the ocean at any time, the number of submarines and where they are, and how much energy is being broadcast and radiated out. And if we're able to create a computer simulation that shows where all this stuff is and shows how much of it there is, it would literally be so mind-blowing that it would actually seem like it was from a science fiction horror movie. But yet that is the reality. That is the truth that none of us want to hear. This is what's going on the earth right now. And a lot of it, the military-industrial complex, I mean, we can't point fingers and say, oh, how dare them do that, because we're the ones paying for it. We're the ones that are going like, oh, yes, protect us against the evil Chinese. Oh, yes, go and blow those evil Palestinians up, and go and blow up Iraq and get our oil. We need our oil and all this stuff. And we've actually got the agenda of NATO, Admiral Nuremberg from the 1960s, telling that the Navy thinks of anything in the ocean that can cast a sonar blip is referred to as biological interference. And then people like Duncan Steele, who wants to infect Mars with genetically engineered microbes, saying that, that rocket launches, that it's good to put them near the ocean because the parts can just fall harmlessly into the ocean because there's nobody there. This is how we think of the ocean. So the whales and dolphins, they're highly evolved beings with feelings and a range of emotions like we have. And they could be stressed out because of the constant levels of noise that are in the ocean, the constant threat of getting hit by ships, damage to their food supply. This is just the constant stuff, not even talking about the sudden, underwater explosion from a depth charge or a missile test or a nuclear explosion or something like that. But they might have been living under chronic stress conditions for a long time, which might even, for example, in the case of the pilot whales, maybe they do have a predisposition towards a panic reaction and follow the leader. But if they're compromised or debilitated physiologically, it may make it easier for this kind of thing to happen, as well as the fact that even though events might have happened for all throughout history that they could be stimulated to panic, the stuff that humans do is now mimicking the same effects, like sudden loud noises or things from the sky. We're creating a much greater number of the same kind of stimuli, thereby increasing the amount of their panic reactions and their strandings. We don't have any way to know, but we've got to look at all these as possibilities. But maybe they don't have anywhere to go. Maybe there's nowhere they can go anymore that's safe and quiet. And maybe they do just, when people commit suicide that are human, like I said in my blog, unless they're going to go and live on the comet like that cult in California that all committed suicide, or so they said, unless they've got some kind of weird belief like that, people don't commit suicide out of joy. They don't go like, oh, I'm going to kill myself because I'm going to reincarnate and go and help somebody. It doesn't work that way. They're sort of like, it's not usually, I don't think it's a rational decision, but they're in despair. They've reached the limit of their tether, and they don't know what else to do. And anyway, we've created this global military-industrial juggernaut I'm back now to themes that I constantly talk about on this show, because I think it really is the reality. We've got this giant military-industrial entity all over the whole planet, on the land, down in the earth, down in the sea, on the surface of the sea, up in the sky, in space, even inside our bodies and our minds. These are all the battle spaces. And it's all being driven by computers and electronics. And so I've even speculated that all this stuff, it's got a mind of its own. Because when you think of what's the first thing the military does when it builds something new, it tries to make it impervious to destruction. It goes like, well, we're going to case harden these electrical circuits so an electromagnetic pulse can't destroy it. We're going to build these underground bunkers so it can withstand a nuclear attack. We're going to build this tank so that no armor-penetrating artillery can pierce it. And so the first thing, the primary imperative of anything military is to prevent it from being destroyed. And so we're up against that. We're creating stuff that's against life, but yet it's designed to not be destroyed. And so we keep going further and further down this road. And I think we crossed a threshold a long time ago where it's not under our control anymore. And I'd like to bring in the work of Dr. Rosalie Bertell here, her beautiful book, Planet Earth, Latest Weapon of War, who I'm having a copy of the new edition of that posted to me by the publisher in France. And she's a Catholic nun and medical doctor who I communicated with. But her research into looking at just the existence of the military, it's the greatest polluter, the greatest waster of life, the greatest consumer of resources, just by its very existence, not even counting when it actually goes to war. It's this gargantuan economy that dwarfs the civilian economy. The militaries of the world consume probably hundreds of thousands of times more hydrocarbons per year than the world's population, even with all the light years of driving that we do. The military consumes way more. And all this is so far out of control. And we're causing ourselves to mutate. And this technology has occurred so fast and so recently. It's growing exponentially, a lot faster than our reproductive cycle. So Arnold Lehman, the toxicologist who was a colleague of Rachel Carson, said that to understand the real genomic effects of radiological or chemical mutagens, we have to study 25 generations of people. Yet all of us alive now are only the third generation to exist. So we haven't even begun to see the effects of the mutagens that we've unleashed and are unleashing, and all the synergetic effects of the electromagnetic stuff, like the 5G related to all the chemicals in our body. And a lot of this is by design. It used to be called binary weapons, but it's a scientific understanding of how chemicals and electromagnetic fields, for example, can interact and take two different frequencies or substances that apart are relatively harmless or benign, but when they hit or interact, reactions are catalyzed that create something extremely poisonous or toxic or damaging. So I believe that, and I've said this many, many times before, that the Hopi prophecy really is closer to the real reality of anything that I know, that we've been here before. You can call it Atlantis, you can call it Lemuria, but we don't really know for sure. But I think the whales and dolphins actually do have the ability to remember this kind of thing. And I'd also like to make the point that I've come to the conclusion that the less humans know about how they communicate, the better. Because any attempt, any progress we make towards what scientists think is communication, all it's going to end up as is a way for us to influence or brainwash them. And then they talk about diseases as being communicable. Well, we'll never talk. We can talk to whales and dolphins all we want, but they're not going to understand. They're not going to talk back to us in English. And I think that there's actually a spiritual and a physiological and a psychological firewall that they have up and that the universe has up to prevent this barrier of communication from ever being breached. And people can talk about AI and cracking the code and decoding this and translating that, and it's all complete bullshit. And I used to think it was a good idea, but now I know it's the worst possible idea. And to use music as a form of communication, but if you think of why you do it, do we want to ask them questions and find out what they know? Or do we want to share beautiful thoughts and thank them and apologize to them for all the bad stuff that we do, and soothe and heal rather than try to exploit and extract information? And so you look at, well, why do we talk? Just to hear ourselves? And so this is everything I'm saying is part of the whole big picture of understanding the whales and dolphins and our effects on them and who they are. But I'm pretty sure that Mother Earth's slate is going to be wiped clean, probably a lot sooner than we think, because it's going to take something outside the Earth, like a cometary or asteroid impact, to take out global military industrial civilization. And this is exactly the kind of thing that the Hopi prophecy talks about. And Thomas Banyaka told us in person when I was at Flagstaff and at Big Mountain in 1986 that they call it the Day of Purification. There's nothing we can do to prevent that from happening. It's essential for Mother Earth's regeneration, but we can hope to lessen the severity of the purification through all the good things that we do. And so that's the driving force between everything that I do. I'm not going to turn back the U.S. Navy. I'm not going to turn back big oil. I'm not going to slow down deep seabed mining or the fishing industry or shipping or even whaling. None of this stuff. None of us are. anything that we do that slows any of that down, it's really going to be like putting a Band-Aid on a decapitation. And with all the military industrial stuff just metastasizing out of control, paid for by us. Like, what percentage of every one of your tax dollars goes for military stuff? And it's like, so we're all in it. And so for us to be aware of all this stuff is the most powerful thing we can do, and let the awareness of the extent to which all our damage in the ocean and to the world is real, and to hold in our hearts the beautiful spirit of the whales and dolphins who do love us. They remember who we really are and who we used to be. We were the closest of friends. And so I think that they know that they're going to be able to ride out the next extinction level event, or the next mass extinction event, which I think is actually coming quite soon in the form of a cometary impact. And I'm actually, with the help of the whales and dolphins who've been communicating with me on this since 2015, we're coming up on one of two windows of time. The last week in October and the first week in November is one of two Anka windows. That's ENCKE. They're the periods of time when the Earth passes through the debris stream of the comet Anka, who was believed to be an ancient supercomet whose fragments or remnants have been involved with things like the Tunguska explosion in 1908, probably the lower Dryas climatological anomaly of about 11,000 years ago, possibly the Chicxulub event of 65 million years ago. All of these could have been related to Anka. So we're coming up on one of these windows of time when it's most likely that this kind of encounter of the Earth is going to happen. So I'm really focusing on creating as much awareness as possible and inspiring people to care and realize we're not going to stop this, but to honor the beauty and power of being here now and try to understand and remember who we are, and to lessen the severity of the purification on behalf of Mitikaye Oyasin, all our family of life. I'm working on some new art, planetary alignments of the dream time, corroboree of the kingdoms, and the little pilot whales are around me all the time like little spiritual butterflies, and I'm painting them in all of my art now and working on some new music. Let's catalyze ocean awareness and live simply so that others may simply live. This is Jeff Phillips Wefferson signing off from Darwin, Northern Territory. Beautiful full moon. We've got Mars coming into its most brilliant on the 5th of October. It's at its closest approach to Earth. And then on the 13th, it's actually in opposition. So this is a very powerful time. The power of Mars is guiding over and influencing all of us now. Good day.